What is up, Evil Dead fans? I'm in the shop, still wearing glasses. Mirror problem still bugging me. For this video, we're gonna talk about tops, and I'm gonna show you how I do my tops. Now, there's a few things I cannot give away. Number one, the way I do mine is exactly the same form as Rob has done for Ash vs. Evil Dead. So I can't give away the measurements to it. There's gonna be certain things I'm gonna mention to figure out your own measurements. And this process, number one, is not just a thing you can just knock out in a day. Because when you do your forms and when you're using these products, you have to let it sit and take its time. If you do not do that, things will break loose, things will get fucked up. Sorry for cussing, but they will. Just doing my initial form with the top and the two sides, that takes about 3 days because I make sure everything is curing correctly before I move on to the next step. I have one in the process of doing, and I'll show you the final result. But when it comes to the measurements of it, the exact measurements, I can't do that because it is Rob's. But I can tell you, kind of guide you in a direction where you can find those measurements. So let's get started. Okay, I got a piece of paper right here. Now let's say this is a side and this is a piece of sheet metal. Let's start here on the side. Now, say this is everything that you're gonna see above the chainsaw body. And you've drawn that out on a piece of sheet metal or a piece of aluminum. I prefer to use aluminum. Now, if you're doing an open back Ash vs. Evil Dead, your clamp has to sit or even angled right below that line. Now, if you're doing an Ash vs. Evil Dead, but you're doing a closed back, take about a 1/4 inch off to about the middle of that clamp. Now, when it comes to the front form, your gas cap either needs to be, this edge needs to be even, your front gas cap even, or this edge just above. You can actually have it just below, but you got to stay really close to that. You can't go too far out with that. So there's a few things for you guys. So if I know this is all above everything, and this is the side thing I do, or the side view that you have, where you're going to see it above the chainsaw on that sheet metal, I do this. Sorry, doing this one-handed. Draw that line, and then I do this. Now what these are tabs. And these tabs, when on sheet metal and cut out, are going to be what connects the top to the side. And you got to remember, when you're doing the side with the toggle switch, it's going to be about right here. You're going to have to eliminate those on that one side. You need to be aware of what side you're doing. So if this was in sheet metal so far and it was already cut out, I would take some kind of channel locks, or I would take pliers. Usually I just use pliers, and I bend these tabs backwards or the other way, flat, but keep this line. What I mean by keeping that line, you want that on that sheet metal or the aluminum, so you don't lose how far you're bending it out, but it'll be cut out regardless. One thing you might want to remember too is when you do the final process, I'm going to talk about this later with Bondo, it's going to get taller here. Trim accordingly for that. So you'd have this right here. What I do also is, knowing where my line is, because I already drew my line out on my piece of aluminum, is I actually cut out a little bit more with it. Not all the way here, about right to there. And then I leave a huge tab right here, because that's how you connect it to either side. Now, when it comes to one of the sides of the chainsaws that I do, there's a certain thing I do with the tab, because I've had so many people try to come after my tops and ask questions, you know, if I sell one, and they're like, I'm going to dissect this damn thing. So so they can reproduce it, they actually have to destroy the chainsaw. So I leave a little extra on the bottom here just because if I need a little extra, I can just trim it up. So there we go with that. And you do that with both sides. You want to make them uniform. Now say this is a piece of sheet metal right here. I can tell you this measurement. You want to use the flat side that you get from the factory and the other flat side. So if you cut something out, say you're cutting out your top, you want this measurement here to here to be 3 1/4 inches. When it comes to the length, you want to cut it out further than what this is. So you can account in the factor of it sloping over the front for the top. You actually want a little longer than that, than what you need, just so you can cut it down. So let's say you just cut it out all the way, 3/4 inches, 3 1/4 inches all the way through here. So the next step is to glue it in. Now, initially I use Gorilla Glue. That's my initial thing that I use. Why? Because when you use Gorilla Glue and you add just a little bit of water, like you wetting down the pieces of aluminum or steel or whatever you're using, it will actually start to bubble and will foam up. So you will get a lot of extra foamage through gaps and stuff like that, and that actually will help fill in gaps. And that's what's nice about that. So when you install the sides, let me get a better picture here. Say this is the back side, and you put these sides in, right? You want a little bit of overhang on both sides. Why? Because you're going to fill that in with stronger products too. So that's one thing that you got to work with. Now, because you can't just leave with the glue, you got to add other stuff with it to strengthen it, give it some structure, because it's going to hold some weight. So you got to make sure it's strong. Basically what we're doing is give it enough strength, and we're going to give it a finish like a brand new car, basically. Okay, now when it comes to the gluing process, you're going to need some clamps. The best clamps you can get are clamps like this. And have a little trigger right here. You can get them at Aces or all kinds of places. The reason why you want something like this is because you have to go over this overlap like that. So this part of the clamp has to clamp down from here, and this one has to be from here. You want about 3 or 4 of them, but when you clamp it down, just make sure that you're only doing about 1/4 to 1/2 at a time. So when I do it, I start from the back. Say this is the back. You want the flat side that was cut from the factory on the back. Use that on the back. It's the easiest way to do it. It makes sure, it just gives you the reassurance that both sides are going to be equal versus having a cut that may be off that you did. So when you clamp it, I look into how far the tabs go where they lay flat. Say I got like 4 tabs, and then I'll clamp from here back. And then I'll let that cure for 12 to 24 hours. And then from there, I'll clamp to about right here. And then so forth and so on. So I just add enough glue. I kind of wet down the metal on both sides, add the glue, clamp it down, let it sit. And it gives you a little more time to readjust a small area like this. This is what I'm saying with letting things sit and cure, because if it doesn't cure here and you take your clamps off and you put them over here, there's a possibility this side could pop up, and you don't want that. It's not bad if you take your piece of sheet metal that's flat and you kind of start to curve it. If you're using sheet metal aluminum, put a little curve into it. When you bend it, just don't bend it severely. You can do it by your hand. It's pretty easy. Now let's get to a piece that I'm working on right now. So this is one I'm working on right now. Looks pretty rough, but you can see it's actually forming out right. You can see I did leave a lot on the sides towards the bottom and these big tabs. Now what I'm going to do next is I will put it into the chainsaw. When it comes to cutting your chainsaw, this is an insert way of doing it. This is not the way Rob does his. I do an insert like they did back in the old days of Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. Now, what I'll do next is I will actually insert this into the chainsaw where it sits properly. Having the cuff done is actually a smart thing to do. You can have this form like this before you cut your chainsaw. It's kind of up to you. Is I will sit it in there and then I will draw a line with what I see above the body. And then I will go underneath it and go about, you know, 1/8 of an inch under it and draw another line. And that will be my cut line, because I don't want this metal to go below the body line. You can go a little bit depending on your hand size, but if you're going with somebody who might have a big hand, you want that basically to be flush inside of that body line. It's a tough thing to do, I know, but that is the way you can assure yourself that you're not going to get cut or somebody else won't get cut. When it comes to this side over here, we got the motor piece. You got to remember, you got to cut this properly down so when it inserts in, the motor piece isn't in the way. If the motor piece is in the way, you're going to have to trim this down a little bit more. Not so much over here. This side down here is not a big deal, and I will trim the tabs down accordingly. This one will be bolted into the body, this side over here, and this one over here, you can do whatever you want with it. You can bolt it into the block. I've bolted in the block, and it will hold there as well. So as you can see, you don't see the glue anymore. What I do on the inside is, after all that Gorilla Glue is all foamed up and stuff, I grind all that crap off. You can use an X-Acto knife and get it off, really, all the excess stuff. Then you can see a little bit of a white right here. I 2-part epoxy all of it to get into all the seams that may have not have got it in there. And then what I do is, this brown stuff is actually fiberglass. So I fiberglass the whole inside just to give it more strength as well. You can see some of this 2-part epoxy up here and on these edges here. Now, before I do this 2-part epoxy on these edges, what I will do is I will use a Loctite Ultra hold, not the gel, but the Ultra hold, and I will put it through the porous areas on this edge and squirt it in there in the porous edges of the Gorilla Glue. And I'll let that sit, and then I cover it with 2-part epoxy. When it comes to this front edge, when you bend this down, you're going to have to form it out just right. It's kind of a pain in the ass, I know. That's something you're just going to have to do. You know, that's regardless. Because basically, when this is all half formed, this front end's going to be sticking out, and you're going to have to bend it down. You may have to tap it down with a hammer, something like that. The reason why I got so much 2-part epoxy up here is it's a give point. And what I do is, if there's any gap, I will actually add something behind here, another supporting piece of metal or something like that, and then 2-part epoxy the piss out of it with industrial strength 2-part epoxy, so it's solid. You want to make sure that your lip is correct and where it's going to sit before you do that, because you'll have problems later. Things will start cracking and you don't want to deal with that. So next thing that I have to do with this is I have to cut it down. I have to sand all the excess off. And then what I'm going to do after that is I'm going to fiberglass the outsides. You can see that there is somewhat of an edge right here, kind of like a little lip. So that fiberglass is going to fit in there just fine. So what we're doing is we're creating strength. It's going to be a little bit heftier. It's going to be a little more solid. There's going to be no flex in it, and it will hold a lot of weight. And if you look right here, if you want to get this thicker right here to give it a better look, you can always cut another piece. This is another piece of aluminum that's behind the initial form piece, because it actually gives it strength and thickness. When this is all trimmed down and done and everything's cured and the fiberglass is done, I will sand down the fiberglass on the sides or any low points, and then I will go over it with Bondo, just regular vehicle Bondo that you can get at any hardware store, and then I will make it completely smooth and nice to the touch and a nice finish. So let's take a look at one of those. Before we show the final product, I'll show you this right now. Now, I used a automotive primer here. Now what I'm doing is filling in any cracks with the primer and also looking to see if there is anything I need to fill in. So nice thing is, if you get a primer that has a fill-in kind of deal where it's a little thicker, it's really nice because it will fill in small cracks. But at the same time, it'll show you where there's bad stuff. Like right here, you won't see that. It's going to be inside the chainsaw body. this line right up here, this small little line is gonna be tucked in. This little edge right here won't be seen to be tucked inside the body. So as long as you have the right placement, you're gonna be fine, because this part will not sit above the body on the way I do it with the insert. All the holes need to be re-drilled out. The reason why I haven't drilled them out yet is this is still drying. And if I need to do any fill-ins, I don't want to pre-drill it. So the next step is to re-drill it, trim anything off. This usually I trim off a little bit more later on, even after it's painted, just because of fitting, things like that, when everything starts coming together. This is deeper here because this will go underneath where the tanks will be, so it has a little bit more depth inside the body. So from here basically on, this little line will be inside the body. This one will be flush with just inside of the lip of the chainsaw body. So the next step I got to do is re-drill it, do a wet sand or a nice fine sand, and then start with the paint process. So here's one that's finished right here. You can see how the clamp goes right, that edge goes right underneath this edge if you're doing the open back. And when you're trimming your top, when you're doing your top and you're bending it down, mark on your chainsaw body that line, and then this little line right here where it comes across. That's how you get your proper line. So there you guys go. That's how you do a top, and it's a long process, trust me, because you're using glues, well actually two different types of glues, 2-part epoxies, and fiberglass and Bondo, and then paint, of course. So it is quite a bit of a process, and I hope this helped you guys out. Till next time, you guys stay groovy.